as an anime avatar too. This is really quality. Values matter, and until Palestinians and their leaders adopt Western values such as individual rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of sexual preference, all of which, of course, are things that exist everywhere and only in the West. These are Western values, mind you. They should not have a state. Statehood, for the sake of statehood, is plainly asinine. So, two quick comments about this, and then if either of you guys want to throw in, I'll turn it over. But one is that I don't think I actually think that my ultimate preference wouldn't even be a Palestinian state. It would be applying basic secular democratic principles that we would apply without hesitation everywhere else in the world, and thus saying that ethnic partition is generally a bad idea, and that and that when people are thoroughly intermingled in that way, and there's no way without without cantonization to partition people. Ethnic partition isn't usually a great idea anyway. See for example, Northern Ireland. So my partition would just be a single secular democratic state with full rights, including right of return for refugees for everybody. But putting that question aside, I'd say that human rights don't actually depend on the values of the humans. So that's one point, right? That I don't actually only want people with good progressive values to have basic human, civil, and democratic rights. For example, I'm fine with conservatives in this country having them, but also I think that if your goal is to have a relatively secular society that scores well on all of these criteria, then continuing a brutal military occupation, denial of basic civil and human rights on both sides of the Green Line is a really bad way to achieve that goal, to put it mildly, right? I mean, historically, Palestinian society actually has been relatively secular, by compared to at least some other, Arab societies. And if you look at, the sort of rise of Hamas, for example, in the first place in the 80s, this is, or more recently, after the sort of the alleged peace process, in the 90s fell apart. This is not something that just happened in a vacuum because bad people had bad souls or something. This is, this is something that happened well in the 80s, in part because Israeli intelligence. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is uncontroversial history. We're actually using divide and conquer tactics against the Palestinian liberation movement and propping up Hamas to a certain extent as a counterweight to Fatah. But then, more recently, because that seemed to many people to be the more credible sort of source of opposition to continuing occupation and oppression. So, I mean, I think if you want to have the best shot at a reasonably secular society that where you have lots of respect for freedom of sexual preferences and all of that stuff, then I think taking the military boot off of everybody's necks would actually be helpful for that.
Yeah, and the other thing is that as much as people that defend Israel constantly want to pretend that it's like this super progressive state for on social issues, they don't even have same-sex marriage legalized there. So the point that LGBTQ issues are something that the Israelis care about a lot and the Palestinians don't, doesn't even apply there.
Well, I mean, I just think it's a weird non sequitur, in the context of these discussions. It's almost
it's the woke imperial thing. You know what I mean?
It's progressive washing. You see this quite a bit. There's quite you have people like Richie Torres and things like that who are keen to play up the very good, sort of, at least comparative to other parts of the Middle East, sort of gay rights or things like that, in a way to kind of mitigate what's going on in the occupation. And I think one of the weird things about this is that the person in the chat was framing this in a kind of collective punishment way. I think most people and many Palestinians would probably agree with this, that they're not happy with the authoritarian Islamist leadership of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and people are sick of the ossified, failed Palestinian Authority. But at the end of the day, in a place like Gaza, there isn't much option. And as they say, they may be bastards, but there are bastards, as they say. So people, just as Israelis rally around the flag of national defense at a time of conflict, so too do Palestinians.
Well, I mean,
we can people can criticize the leadership, but at the end of the day, there's an issue of fundamental human rights. And if you're saying like Palestinians don't deserve this because they have bad leaders, then you're advocating some kind of collective punishment.
Yeah, for sure. I would just want to add, one of the reasons why Hamas was able to come into the position that it did in the 80s, as has been implied, but it was actually strategic adoption of dual power strategies. So they replaced a lot of the social safety net that the PLO was unable to provide, and the Israelis were unwilling to. And that was how they gained their popularity even more than their religious program. The religious program enabled them to get funding, frankly, for it. But it was that providing of a social form that made them popular. If there was no boot on the neck there, that would not be necessary, and it probably would not have formed the way it did. Furthermore, I mean, Israel was playing the PLO and and Hamas against each other, favoring Hamas, sometimes favoring the PLO the other, to make sure that, for one, it kept the Palestinian territories with divided government for a long time, and that was useful. To pick up on Forrest's point, if you know anything about the trends in Israel, Israel's been hemorrhaging secular Jews for a while. So Israel's been hemorrhaging secular Jews for a while. There's been a lot of liberal Jews have been coming back to the United States, and even going back to like Germany, despite kind of an uptick in anti-Semitism in Europe, because of the way Haredi and nationalist politics are beginning to dominate the Israeli Knesset. And, we're getting to the point where, like, there isn't really, like, I remember when you had, like, Kadima and Likud was probably the scariest national possibility. It's now becoming kind of the center of Israeli politics because of the shifts of trends there. So the idea that you're defending some kind of progressive state in Israel, I think you can only defend that if you don't know anything about what's going on in Israel's own internal political dynamics.